This presentation and the information materials and source code contain here and collected material are provided as is and for general information. Okay, this is just a legal thing because we've put this on the web. It's all open source. You'll be able to access it. You can use it all for reference later. The one thing you can't do is sell it to somebody else. That's that's the sole privilege of EngFlow. But other than that, have fun. And speaking of having fun, if you're not already aware, we have a game night tonight. You're all cordially invited. I will show this slide again at the end, but if you want to grab it now, you can, and get in ahead of the hoi polloi that apparently don't have a watch. Huh?
That's tomorrow night.
Is that tomorrow night? Oh, sorry, I meant tomorrow night. I've had a lot of coffee today. I have a lot of coffee every day, but man, what do they put in this stuff? It's good. All right. Me. I did some cool stuff at Google and Apple for a while, and then I got sucked into the Bzlmod world, and now you're here to endure the result. But as a way to kind of stall for time and read the room, I'm curious, how many of you are still on Basil 6? Okay, that's good. That knocks out a chunk of the program. 7? Okay. Okay, we got some folks on 8. All right, we got a couple people on 8. What about the pre-releases? Nobody's on the pre-releases? Not even the Basil developers? So has anyone already started a migration? Okay, we got a handful. And who hasn't started one yet? Really?
It's both yes and no.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so, and just because I'm going to take this opportunity to be embarrassing, does anybody, actually to a few people, does anybody actually contribute to the development of the Bzlmod specification? Okay, got a few of you here. Well, hopefully you'll learn a few things today. What about rule sets? Does anybody here maintain a repository that other people use? Okay, we got a few. So I'm going to be talking a lot more about, well, if I have time, we'll talk a bit more about those use cases specifically at the end. Well, anyways, it's a whole other situation for people who do reusable things. Out of curiosity, who's building on Linux, Mac, Windows? Jay did thumbs down. Okay, so the example project here actually will build on Windows as of yesterday, but it has to use git bash, just so you know. And also just shout out, are there any specific things about Bzlmod that you're expecting to get out of this today? For anyone, sorry? Vibes. No vibes. Vibes are dead in here. Anything else? Any specific problems or things that you hit? Other than, oh, I saw a nudge. What's... It's not a big room. We could all see.
We have migrating through workflows to Bzlmod is really kind of painful, even with the hybrid mode activated.
It's interesting. I actually don't do the hybrid mode at all. I haven't had to. So maybe there's some value in that. Yeah?
Run file paths.
There's a little bit of information in here, yes. And you might want to talk to David later.
Effectively passing constraints to Bzlmod repo. Basically, some of our existing workspace files will use constraint from the root repo to affect the behavior of a load module when we finish pulling that in.
Yeah. So that sounds to me like, this is going to get into the territory of module extensions versus macros, and that's a big part of what I'm going to go over today. And what do you guys want to get out of this today?
Sorry for coming.
No, actually, yes.
I was trying to finish my econ.
Hey, you're in Georgia. You got to make time for pie.
Is everything an acceptable answer?
Sure. Why not?
How to find happiness in life.
The path to Bzlmod is the path to happiness, as I've found. Led me here today with all of you.
I want to figure out how canonical repo names work.
We will talk a little bit about canonical repo names, yes. All right, well, this is awesome. So I actually, just so you know, this is part of the reason I have this is to read the room, but also to give time for people to show up, so. It worked. All right, here are some of the things I, sort of had in mind as I was putting this together. Want to make sure everybody's on the same page and clear on what Bzlmod is and how it works. And no pressure that the people that implemented it are in the room, but yeah. Oh, Fabian's not in here, but everyone else is. So Zhudong, Yuping, Jay even. Well, you didn't implement it, but you reviewed the design, so yeah. So I just use it, and I just figured some stuff out that hopefully isn't, too wrong. But I want to, you'll hopefully get, well, actually there is a vibe here. The vibe is incrementalism. So hopefully you'll see that the migration doesn't have to be stop the world all at once. You can do a piece at a time, make progress, and not break the world while you do it. We'll talk about compatibility with older Basels and other versions of things, and how you can kind of maintain that throughout. Even if we don't cover every specific issue that you might ever hit, hopefully you'll see enough and sort of get a sense of like the vibe and the workflow so that if you do hit something that we don't cover, it's not going to feel completely alien. And I'm going to provide resources. I'll give you the URL in a second. I don't see anybody with their machines. Oh, you got a machine open. But hopefully it's easy enough to remember. All these slides and the example repo are available as open source now. That's why I had that legal disclaimer that I was helpfully reading. So after this session, all of the references and materials and everything are there, so you can pick them up and hopefully refresh your memory. But I think the most important thing here is that last word on the slide is the mindset. Like, hopefully, if nothing else, if you're not already there, you come out of this, you sort of have the lay of the land, you know what's going on, you can do this, and it's not going to seem like such a monumental task. So, got a lot of things to cover. We may not cover all of them. I want to be responsive to what folks are sort of most interested in here as we go through. Because the materials are available later, whatever we don't get into, hopefully you could dig into it later. But there's a lot of territory here. And part of the problem, the way I've laid things out this way is, I've written a bunch of blog posts about this stuff that I used to distill into this presentation. I managed to migrate rules Scala over the course of 58 pull requests over the course of 8 months. And today we have not weeks, not days. We have 2 hours to go over all this. So I'll do what I can to provide as much value in that time. But don't panic. It's going to look very dense when it's on the screen, but we'll take our time, we'll digest it together, and like I said, you'll have all of this material available for reference. All right. What is the difference between Bzlmod and the legacy workspace system? You tell me. Potentially.
Things don't have to be in order.
That's a big one.
Can you repeat the answer?
Oh, can you repeat the answers? We're going to play repeater like in Super Troopers. Yes?
You need to slap a bunch of stuff in a file whenever you want to pull in a new rule set.
You don't need to slap in a bunch of stuff in a file whenever you pull a new rule set. That's right. And before, your name? Philomena said earlier, the declarations don't have to be in a specific order because that is one of the biggest problems with workspace. You change the order and you change what you get. Anything else that comes front of mind? Yeah, go ahead.
Some degree of encapsulation, so there's not one shared global namespace. Well, there kind of is technically, but not in the sense that we're used to.
Yeah, so encapsulated namespaces for where repos come from, so you can actually have a fighting chance of knowing what pulled in what, and they don't stomp on one another. Yeah.
There's a reasonable-ish way of having multiple versions of a dependency.
Yes, a reasonable-ish way, that's a good way of putting it, of having multiple versions of a dependency, multiple version override. All right. Well, this has been good. Let's see what I got. So for one thing, they can be largely self-configuring. You don't have to call in, you don't have to load all of the macros from everything you're using and invoke all those. The modules themselves can do a lot of their own lifting, of course. We obviously know it's a replacement for Workspace. Pardon me. Module version resolution is a big deal. So, Bazel has a way of, and we'll see it illustrated. And, you probably already know this maybe, but just in case, Bazel will do the work for you of figuring out, across the module graph, how to use the best, or for some definition, the best version available of a particular dependency. We want to avoid repo collisions and all that other sort of fun stuff that we get from Workspace, which we will revisit that just for the sake of shared trauma bonding, briefly. Module extensions, which have different semantics for macros, they sort of a replacement for that model, but you have to know what the differences are. Not only making a lot of your direct dependencies explicit, you have to use repo or Bazel dep or whatever, but you can actually hide all the things in your tool chains if you do it right. And we'll talk about the hub repo pattern if we get there. And then, of course, repo scopes and canonical repo names. So in the beginning, out of the 12 blog posts that I did, 4 of them were about repo names. We're actually not going to talk that much about repo names. We will cover them. But yeah, those are the things that usually bite you first and can be the most mystifying when you encounter them. All right, so this is the repo, and you can clone it now if you can on all your phones, I guess. But it's github.com, EngFlow-Academy, Bzlmod, Bootcamp. You don't have to clone it right now. We're not going to change anything, actually. We're just going to use it for demonstration purposes. But you can walk along through the steps either now or later, because all the steps will be here, to sort of replicate the different steps that we'll use to show what's happening. And so, yeah, this is how you clone it. This is how you make sure it's working. You don't really have to check out that branch. You can. Main will actually work. And version 1 doesn't work with Windows. I only realized a couple days ago that it didn't, and I fixed it yesterday, but only on the main branch. So, but it works on main for Windows. And then, of course, you should, we'll go over the layout here in a second. There's 2 main directories. Well, there's 3. So 2 secret weapons, or fear, surprise, and whatever. So the Bootcamp directory, the Bootcamp module, repo, whatever you want to call it, that's where most of the action is happening. That's where most of the perspective comes from. The other directories are, most of them are repos that this module uses. And then you can run this test, and it should make nice, pretty output that makes you happy. Makes me happy. Happy little output. So the idea of this repo is it doesn't really do anything useful, but you can sort of see in the commit history, and we'll take a look at that a little bit, that each commit introduces an issue or fixes an issue. And the commit messages are voluminous, loquacious, excessively detailed, but hopefully useful if you are in a dark pit of despair and you have no other light in the darkness to show you the way out. And it also shows you that you can make progress towards specific milestones. By milestones, I mean either tags or branches. I've got both in there for versioning reasons. But in the end, it just really ties the room together, man. It just takes everything we're going to talk about, and it's in there, and hopefully puts it in context that helps make sense of what's going on. That's just my opinion, man. Okay, no Lebowski fans, come on. Okay, yeah, like I said, it does nothing useful except show the mechanics, the way things can go wrong and the way you can put them right. Bootcamp is the main module for our purposes. It's the idea of you're a consumer of other modules. Rules Magic is Well, one, it's just an excuse for me to geek out about my obsession with the Zork trilogy as a kid that got me in love with the command line before I even knew what a command line was. So rules magic is just sort of an example rule set, if you will, that we will use to, illustrate these issues. And then this dependencies thing comes in at the end when we talk about if you maintain a rule set and you need to maintain compatibility with a lot of different versions, that's where that module comes in. Let's look at some code. Okay, I'm not going to change any code, and I want all of you, as we go through this, if you have a question, if you want to see something else or look in more detail, just shout it out. But I'm just trying to give you sort of the lay of the land to get you a little familiar with what's in there, and then we can sort of navigate our way through it. All right. So, got the workspace file. We know it. We hate it. And then we got module.basel file. And these are both in the Bootcamp module. I'm gonna see if I can do this. Might be a little easier. All right. So what we hopefully can see here, I think folks are, yes, Jay?
Could you zoom in a bit?
Oh, it's perfectly legible on my screen. I don't know what's. There we go. So, this should hopefully look familiar. It's some sort of a rule set. We have to pull in all the macros. We have to load those. We have to do it in a certain order. Oh, there's Bazel features. There's rules CC. There's rules Java. And, of course, protobuf. And Python. Those are the big ones everybody depends on. Over in the module.basel world, so these local path overrides, these are just, I wanted this repo to be as self-contained as could be, so I have to use these local overrides to get these particular modules. They're not in the Bazel central registry, which we will talk about later. But here we have this use extension call, and we're going to import these module extensions. Before I go any further, are folks familiar with what module extensions are, or does anybody really need David? So are you used to workspace setup macros like over here on this side? So, okay.
Mike migrated my repo for me. So.
Yeah, but you're familiar with workspace?
Yes.
Okay. So the essential idea is over here. Where do I have? See, it's so voluminous. I lost track of where things are. Do I have? Oh yeah, here it is. I've got this repo that contains a magic leaflet. So when you're west of house and you open the mailbox and you read it, and it tells you Zork is a game of whatever. So this is how we do it in a workspace world. This is how we do it in a module.basel world, serving the same essential function to give us access to this repository, but the syntax is a little different, and the semantics underneath are substantially different. We'll get into detail there. Okay, what else do we have here? We've got a configuration repo. So you might be able to tell that, because this is a teaching example here, I have specifically designed the workspace macros here to be as close as possible to the module extension macros. So that is sort of a migration strategy of mine is, to try to make the API as similar and familiar as possible. And then what's actually happening under the hood here, the extension is invoking the same workspace macro. So what we'll find as sort of like a strategy for the migration that I think is just good practice is rather than writing completely new logic entirely to replicate what the old thing did, we're basically putting a shim over top of the existing behavior. So the extension is essentially just gathering parameters and calling the same thing. I don't know if that makes sense so far, or if you just want me to stop talking about that and keep going. Questions? Nope? Okay, you all seem so thrilled. Okay, it'll be thrilling is when we get to the difference between workspace and Bzlmod, and you'll remember why you're here. Okay, so that's the Bootcamp module. That's sort of the main consumer. Over here in Rules Magic, it's a very similar story. I'm not going to go through line by line, but The files actually look very similar here. There's not a lot of difference between these two modules at this point. So what is it? I wanted the first one to go over here and that one to go, okay. It just looks very, very similar, just so you know. If you go pop open the repo later and try to follow through, there's not a lot of difference from, I mean, there are going to be some differences that we'll get into later. Most notably, in both workspace files, we have to, call these macros and invoke the toolchains macros so we can instantiate the repos and, register the toolchains. Over here, this is the rules magic repo. And here it's pulling in the tool chains. Well, actually, this is more to the point here. Here it's, invoking this, well, not invoking, it's registering this extension for tool chains. And then it's registering all the tool chains here. We have something that uses in the Bootcamp, this is the consumer. It uses that same extension to select, and it just so happens I'm still selecting all the same tool chains, but that's not necessarily the case in general. But it doesn't have a register tool chains call. The only thing that it's pulling in is, well, it is pulling in, as a matter of fact, if I didn't have a test that used a certain flag, I wouldn't need any of this. I could just, oh, delete doesn't want to work anymore. There we go. When I don't need to use that flag in one of my tests, I could get away with this because the rules magic module will configure and register the tool chains all by itself. So that's something, maybe you're aware of it, I don't know. Maybe this is all like, oh, we knew this dude, like, come on, move on. But hey, maybe there's some value in reinforcement. Now, something else here that we're going to talk about is the depths file. Latest steps. So this is, you probably know depths macros from the workspace world because that was the way, the ecosystem evolved was every, reusable repository had a depths macro that would instantiate all the, or try to instantiate all the repos that it needed, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe maybe right here. But, pardon me. But what we'll find in the module.bazel world is that you don't really need that because you've got, pardon me. For the most part, at least as far as Bazel, when you're depending on other Bazel modules, you've got the magic of Bazel depth that does all that for you, and you don't have to worry about maybe calls or getting things in the right order. This is all stuff you probably already know, just making sure that we're not leaving anybody behind. So I've got a couple of macro plus module extension combinations here. Let me put this down for a second. And again, I'm just kind of going over this, so hopefully it's looking familiar. You're kind of getting the lay of the land of this thing. You can see where we're going to go with it. So, config. And that is the macro. Oh, God damn it. Okay. And this is the, so on the left, this is a fairly complicated macro file. I based this on the rules Scala configuration repo. It's very similar. That's why in the comment here I'm like, oh yeah, it's modeled after this. So it's doing some things that are similar to what rules Scala does just because it can, and I wanted to just illustrate the principle. Now, over here on the right, you'll see it's an extension. I've got a module extension directory here. And it's importing things from the same config file, the same macro, same constants, things of that nature. And it does a few things. We'll get into what it's doing later. But it's essentially just collecting configuration parameters across the module graph and then calling the same macro. This, obviously I renamed the import of the original macro name because it conflicts with the module extension name. But that's one of the things I'm talking about here. So when you're making the migration, if you have macros, you have to adapt, even if you don't maintain a rule set, but you've got your own internal macros. There's a way to design it so that you can basically use the same implementation as Workspace, not have to recreate all that. You just sort of have to wrap how you gather the configuration parameters. Yes?
What are some like good use cases of being able to have information across the entire module graph instead of it being instantiated every single time it's used?
So the question is, what are good use cases of collecting information across the module graph instead of instantiating it wherever it's used? Tool chains. So you may only directly need a particular tool chain from a particular rule set, but maybe something you depend on also depends on that same module, and it needs another subset of the tool chains. So in that particular case, you could just traverse the whole module graph and find all the tool chains that are used anywhere, and then configure those, and not configure any that are not used. That's one case that just leaps to front of mind. Before I get to you, it looks like you've got a...
I was just gonna say, like, in theory, shouldn't Bazel's like action deduplication like take care of that, so you can just, if you instantiate the same tool chain multiple times, you're fine? Or
Well, one, I don't know what that is. Two, this mechanism also just sort of it's not going to instantiate the same tool chain multiple times. It's only going to collect that multiple tool chains are needed. Whatever tool chains are needed, it'll create each one time. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, maybe a more basic question, which is, like, I tried to run the test command, and I'm getting something about, like, the bin Java not being found.
Oh, yeah, you might need to install system Java, which, yeah. I mean, very few people have hit that, but that sounds like a problem that somebody had, and he said when I gave the dry run of this before, he had said that he didn't have the system Java installed. So do you have that installed?
No, I mostly want to understand, like, why.
Well, if you go to... So if we go to installing Bazel, all I know is that wait, where is it?
Yeah, actually, so my understanding was that Bazel no longer required you to have the Java in your system. So maybe rules Java. Yeah.
Well, I will tell you that, oh no, it starts off with the latest rules Java. I will have to figure that out. I don't know. I haven't hit that. But I know somewhere in the documentation, and I've probably got the link in one of the slides, the documentation still says install system Java to install Bazel. But is that not supposed to be the case anymore?
No, Bazel itself has an embedded JDK.
Yeah.
So itself doesn't need you to install Java, but sounds like maybe some rules for doing that. I don't know.
Oh, well,
I can take a look at it.
yeah. But let me just see something.
I think there are some flags in Bazel that like are experimental, like it's like no incompatible. We're able to use rules Java instead of the non-star archetype Java rules. Perhaps that flag needs to be.
Bootcamp run tests. So, I mean, actually, I'm running the test script. It's doing more than just running the basic thing. And again, I've done this 1,000 times, and I've got the system Java installed, so I just haven't hit that problem. But just so you know, I'm not lying. It's not busted. Of course, the first thing it does is it tries to build, and as one always does when one tries to build, one recompiles protobuf. So that's what we're waiting for right now, and I'm just going to stall for time for the next, maybe there's another 15 seconds left, or it could be an hour, who knows.
PR landed in protobuf.
Yes, I did.
To consume a binary proto-seed.
Yeah, but I didn't do it for this. I was so tempted because you don't know how many times I've recompiled this, but yeah, but I also didn't want to overcomplicate the example. So, but yeah, so hopefully, if installing the system Java gets you around the problem for now, and then we can dig into what's happening later. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about when the implementation function for the module extension would run?
I will talk about that during the entire module extension section. But the short version, the foreshadowing version, okay, they're not paying attention. So I think what happens is that, oh shit. So after, there's sort of a blurry line, I think, between loading and analysis. So the Bazel will build the module graph, and so it'll have a data structure that has, the nodes of this module, has this metadata for the extent, what they call tag classes, which are like structs that correspond to module extensions. So it will already have sort of that graph of metadata, and then it invokes each module extension one time. And that module extension will have access to that whole graph, and we'll see that. Okay, I passed the audition. All right. Moving on. Unless there are other questions right now. Nope? Okay. I'm not going to pop open the tool chains one. We'll see it a little bit later if we have time, but you kind of get the idea. There's a pattern here where we're not completely rewriting everything. We're just building on top of what's already there. I already demonstrated this little helper. It's just a little helper script that is based somewhat on what Rule Scala already had and the changes I made to its test scripts, and then I did some other things. I'm like, oh, I should add this back to Rule Scala. But it's a way that enabled me, as I was developing it, and if you want to experiment with it, to very quickly switch between different versions of Bazel and between Workspace and Bzlmod at various points in the history of the project. And so, as you can see, so I cut these slides and everything on Thursday, and then somebody released another rolling Bazel release. But if you'll notice, I guess Jay wants me to zoom in. That's what I was running with here. So the latest bleeding edge rolling release works with all these changes. But what I also want to show, I'm not going to run demos for everything here, but it will also work with, as of noon today, I ran this again, the last green release. If you know about Basilisk and you know about the build, the labels, so whatever just came hot out of, the CI pipeline, this project works with that, and Bazel 6.5 works with it. So the point of this is that all these changes, and we're going to look at the Git history here in a moment, everything that I've done is both forward and backward compatible. And I put things in a certain order to just sort of make sense of it and tell a narrative, but you can really do it in any order you want. There's nothing that says that you have to do one of these pieces before the other. Well, maybe there's a couple of exceptions. And then obviously because of the order in which I did things, the diffs have to land in a certain order. But in principle, all the changes that I needed to make to go from a workspace-only build with Bazel 6 to a Bzlmod-only build with the freshest, binary out of CI, you don't have to do everything all at once, and you're not going to lose compatibility across that very broad range. And you don't force other people to upgrade either once you start making changes. So I talked a little bit about run tests. I'm also using, if you're familiar with Basilisk's mechanism where you can write a tools Bazel script, there's a little bit of that. So there's some flag swapping and switching under the hood there, which I know, Jay told me he's like, oh, I don't like hiding flags. But there's really too much, and it's just a pain in the ass to fill my slides with flags everywhere. So if you want to know what the flags are doing, you can look under the hood there. And then I've got a little test framework as part of Rules Magic. That's what's generating that pretty output that started off being a replica of what was in Rule Scala, and now I want to make Rule Scala better. So how many folks are familiar with how to navigate the output directory of Bazel? Oh, we got a few. Oh, we got some iffy. Okay, well, we got a few folks that are familiar. Well, hopefully, folks can double check me on this. And for those of you who haven't done it before, welcome to my world, the underworld. I want to like make a Prince reference. We're all gathered here today. There's something else, the underworld. We'll figure it out. Okay, so you'll see that Bazel info command in there for output base. That basically is where Bazel keeps all the files for your build, and it has a unique, like fingerprint. So whatever directory you're in doing that build has its own unique output directory, and that external directory under there has all the unpacked repositories, everything that your build needs on disk in a directory. And I'm not going to replicate this in my terminal because you just see that. That's why I put it on the slide. But you can run through it and do something similar. And you'll notice, so because I've run several builds that are workspace and Bzlmod, I've got like different absiles with like one looks normal and one has a plus on the end, and same thing for some of these others. And you can see from the annotations, the directories that don't have like a plus delimiter in them, in this case, those were from workspace builds. The ones that have a plus or maybe multiple components, which that is a canonical repo name when you see the plus in there, those come from module extensions. And you can kind of see, even though it's an implementation detail no one should depend on, ever, I'm going to repeat that a lot, it's still nice to be able to go under the hood to understand where is this coming from. Now, there are other ways of doing that too, but this is also one really under the hood way to get to that information. Questions before I move on? Yeah.
This is like somewhat related to what you're talking about. Something I miss about the workspace system is that I used to be able to query like / external whatever, and then like see the external repos. But now with Bzlmod, unless I like use repo, like there's basically no way for me to query like repositories that I transitively depend on. And sometimes it's really hard to poke around, and I have to like look for them external. Sometimes they're not there. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, this.
Will they necessarily like always be there?
Yes.
So okay.
There's also, someone just added a PR to add the Bzlmod show repo -- all repos command.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I should have asked, are we recording? Do you have a room mic getting the discussion?
We don't, but it's such a small room that we can hear it.
Oh, you can't? Okay.
Repeat the questions if you feel like they're too far away from the mics. Yeah,
Okay. So you can hear the questions coming through?
a little bit.
Okay, good. Okay, well, you let me know.
But if you want to repeat the questions, just so it's.
Well, so I guess the Cliff Notes version, oh, did I just, oh. Uh-oh. There we go. All right, it's touchy. Literally the definition of touchy.
All repos. I'm not sure it's in yet.
Let's see.
It's
It's in?
Bzlmod, because I do have the Bzlmod command coming up.
Show repo, all repos.
Bzlmod show repo all repos.
Yeah, all repos being the flag, being the flag. Yeah. So Bazel.
Yeah.
Bazel space mod space show underscore repo space -- all
Let's see about that.
repos.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail the workshop. It's just
That's
Hey, it's a boot camp, it's a workshop, we're all learning together.
Is this last screen?
Yeah, no, this is going to be the rolling. It's show repos.
Show repo and then -- all underscore repos. If it doesn't work, we should.
Oh, whoops, hold on. Sorry, microphone.
Yeah, please try to use last screen.
Wait, oh, it's not plural.
Oh, right.
See, you're learning something today.
Yeah.
Oh, how about that?
So that's literally everything under your.
that is extremely helpful.
Okay, so forget about this.
Implemented that afterwards.
Forget about this pushd whatever business. No. I mean, the pushd is still useful if you actually want to see the code and try to understand, like, I mean, of course, Bazel will often print like a path, but this is a way that, you can kind of get there without having to rely on that. So something I want to point out, it's like, okay, well, let's figure out what are the versions of things that are in this directory. And one way you could try to do that is to grep for the version string of the module.basel file. And I've highlighted a few things here that are interesting. So rules Java, the workspace and Bzlmod version, they both have the module.basel. They have the same version number. That's great. We have this rules Java built-in thing. Oh, man, this thing is hilarious. We'll see about that. We'll notice that rules Python, the workspace module Bazel, doesn't have a version number at all because it was not pulled from the Bazel central registry. Therefore, in its original source form, it does not have a module number. So this varies repo by repo. You could see protobuf. It has a module.basel, also has its own version constant, which is nice. Not every repo has it, but just so you know, it's there. And we are, yes, this is on purpose in workspace. We have to stop at 31.1. We can keep going in Bzlmod. The reason being, this is one of the compromises for maintaining Bazel 6 compatibility. Protobuf 32 deliberately has a fail check in it to say if it's Bazel 6, just fail. So that's why that's there, in case you're wondering. All right. So let's talk about version history. This won't be exactly the output you see. It's going to be very, very close. But when I talked about how things can happen incrementally, and you can sort of see milestones here, you can see where it says origin Bzlmod. That's where, oh, I finally got Bzlmod working. In this case, you can't see it yet, but it's Bazel 8. Because then you could see after that, we are able to get Bazel 9 working. After that, we migrate tool chains and so forth. And then the last one is, the last milestone is where I've got all the examples of how to maintain compatibility with a broad range of dependencies. I like using git k a lot. It ships with git in case you didn't know it's there. And then there's also a command or a terminal-based one that I need to use more called tig. Oh, wow, I'm like really plosive today. I apologize. These are all ways of seeing the same thing. You know, pick your poison. Here you could see a little more output here. And just to make it concrete, let's do it. So this is the current state of the main branch, which is based on the toolchains branch, so on down the line. And you can see this is where we start with Bazel 6 compatibility, and I just fixed the Windows build yesterday. And there's a lot of different steps here. There is a lot of information in the commit messages, maybe more than you need. But I wanted to make sure I understood why certain things were breaking at each of these steps. And especially in this phase between Bazel 6 and Bazel 7, you will find rules Java built in showing up a lot. Because essentially, when you upgrade rules Java and it's trying to negotiate between rules Java and rules Java built in, hilarious things happen. So, but hopefully everybody's on Bazel 7, so you don't have to worry about that. Yay. And by the time you get to Bazel 8, things really, start to even out, and the changes are, a lot more straightforward to manage in that case. You don't get into as many of the weird repos stomping on one another, or this rule registered this tool chain under this type, but when you do this, it breaks. It's all in there if you want to go insane. So here's sort of the sequence of the milestones I kind of went over. And again, the point I want to make is when we see this reverse chronological order, of course, like you would see in one of the Git log viewers. So, in terms of time, we're starting at the bottom. We're only compatible with Bazel 6 and Workspace. But as we hit these milestones, you could see we're ratcheting up the degree of compatibility that we have with newer versions, with Bzlmod and newer versions of Bazel. Any questions about that pattern or how the history works at this point? Pretty obvious. It's like you're listening to the kindergarten cop. And not a tuma. All right. Okay. So this is the shared trauma bonding portion of our program. Let's revisit why Workspace was great until it wasn't. So each line in that workspace file, you read it, you execute it, everything's in the same scope. And because of that, the last repo that gets instantiated with a particular name wins, unless you try and instantiate it with maybe, and then the first one wins, but you don't really kind of know which is which.
There's something that makes it worse, because it's not exactly the last repo with the same name wins. It's the last repo within the first segment of the workspace file, segmented by low statements, which makes it basically impossible to know.
Dude, I can't even.
So it's even
Like,
worse, it's even worse than what you said. Okay, yes.
wow. I just, oh, it's all coming back. But yeah, in the end, I think we're familiar with this pain. Like, what the hell even is this, and where does it come from? So, let's work through some examples. Now, I'm not going to type this in, but you can see I'm using Bazel 7.7 and deliberately building in workspace mode here. And then I'm going to the external directory. And again, I'm looking for versions of things. Module.bazel is not reliable, so what else can we do? Well, there's this great flag that I think it even works in Bazel 6 called experimental repository resolved files. So if you don't know about that, you can look it up in the Bazel docs. The link, you could tell I've got like copious links here. So if you get the slides later, you don't need to search for this stuff. You just go to the slide and click it. But it will helpfully, print out a file here, and I've named it out.bazel. Now you need to do a clean expunge, because if there's already stuff there, it limits the information that you get. Pardon me. But the nice thing is you can run it with no build and get all the information you need. So it's a Starlark file. It has basically a list with dicts in it. And so you can look at it directly, or you could do what I did and have this nifty little tool to help you slice and dice it a little bit, and maybe even spit it out as JSON if you would prefer that. So running this little tool in verbose mode, this is what I get for rules CC in the project right now. So it tells me it's got like the call stack of what sequence of macros led to getting this repo, and the URL helpfully has the version number in it. So that is a lovely thing to have. When you run it in non-verbose mode, it just gives you basically the URL or the file path or whatever it's available. And we could see here, this is a lot more reliable than when we were just trying to grep the module file before. So here we can actually tell this is what our build has in it, these versions of these dependencies. Now, I don't have a patch for this, and I think we all know that if you change the order of things, that changes what you get. And so this is a specific example where I just, by hand, I moved protobuf to the top of the stack and instantiated its steps first, and we get wildly different versions of things in our build as a result. So yeah, and it gets even funnier when you get into rules Java specifically and the things that can happen between the built-in version that Bazel executes and when you're trying to actually upgrade the rule set. Has anybody hit any of those issues before? Well, let me show you something. Actually, I've got this on a later slide, but this sort of series here, the 791, the 710, things like that, they're basically inconsistencies between Rules Java 7.6.5 that is baked into Bazel and these newer versions of Rules Java that lead to some extremely confounding error messages. So, but if you've moved past that in your life, don't feel the need to look back. But the reason I ended up hitting these was when I first started doing the rule Scala migration, it only worked with Bazel 6. So I had to get it to Bazel 7 first, and man, that was like a baseball bat to the face. So again, if you stare into the abyss, it will stare back. Scripts can help. And these are just links to the commit history in GitHub, basically, where these particular changes with the commits with these titles have a lot more information about workspace-related breakages due to that change. And oh yeah, that's the other thing. Sometimes repos lie. Let's look at rulescc 009, and its module file helpfully says 004. Oh, that was a fun day. Yeah. And then this is what I call my diary of a madman. R.I.P. Ozzy. So, yeah, each of these commits, like I said, it's just jumping straight off the deep end into the abyss if you want to really know the pain that can happen when you get repo mismatches with the rules Java built in. But we're in a better place now. We've moved on. Things are happier. They work better. We have the Bzlmod model. We've already talked about this somewhat. We won't belabor this, but I'll give folks just a second to scan this and see if anything jumps out as new information or if you have a question.
We had cases in our repo where the order of basal depths in module.basal was in fact significant and you could not switch them around because you needed something to be available before the next thing could use it.
In terms of tool chains?
In terms of like module extensions working.
That sounds, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that should matter is the tool chains.
Yeah. I'd like to dig into that if you got an example.
I don't think it was tool chains, but I could be wrong. It was a while since I ran into this.
Yeah. But that is one detail. So in principle, in most practice, hopefully, the order of basal depths shouldn't influence the version that you get, but it may influence what tool chains, the order in which tool chains are registered. And we can talk about that later. Maybe that makes sense already because tool chains was always like an order-based registration model. So it's true as well in Bzlmod, except it's now, basically a well-defined traversal of the module graph determines the order. Yeah.
If I'm the only one who feels this way, then just ignore what I'm saying. But I feel like module.basal.log files oftentimes change for really random reasons.
Did you hear that, Jay?
I was hoping maybe you might be able to go over the log file format, at least a summary, so I can understand why it's randomly changing.
Two things. One, yes, we'll cover it.
Okay.
Two, it doesn't change as much anymore, which is why I've started using it after.
Which version?
I think, 8, well, I think even 7.7 is better. 8 and 9 are, say what? Yeah.
But we have been backporting those changes to the LTS branches. So use the latest version of the LTS branch. It should work much better.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the first version of the Bzlmod, essentially anytime you change your module.basal file, it would get a log file change.
Oh, okay.
It had a hash. It had a hash of the module.basal file.
So I know that, and then we upgraded, and that wasn't happening more. But still, sometimes some random strings would change for.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I think
The version name could be encoded in the transitive Bzl files you use, and then that would cause changes.
I've been seeing such changes introduced by Basel features because it uses Basel version to compare if the first feature is available or not. When the Basel version, every time you upgrade your Basel binary, the version number changes and it affects the Bzl file it generates, and then the hash transitively goes into some files.
But just so we don't get hung up on it now, we're going to come back to it. We can talk about it a little bit more, but it has gotten better. And I came up with some guidelines on how to sort of manage it a little bit easier. But a point Jay made to me when he guilted me into ignoring it was that without the lock file, you don't have integrity hashes of whatever you're pulling in. So it's the direction we need to go to make sure that we maintain build integrity. Instead of just basal depths that don't have like a SHA-256 or anything, your lock file is what will have it. But we will dig into that a little bit. All right, let's talk about minimal version selection. How many folks are already familiar with what this does in terms of the mechanics? Okay, so a few folks, but okay, worth a refresher. So this is just going to be a quick, high-level illustration of what Bazel does with this information using the actual versions of these modules here that I pulled out of the Bazel Central Registry, which I've used that a few times. Hopefully folks know what it is, but I'll talk about it more in a minute. So we're going to play this game here of when we got rules Java and rules Python, what version of protobuf do we get? So hopefully you could see the answer is already there, but we're just going to walk through it. So rules Java 7 doesn't actually care, believe it or not. 7.10 anyway. So rules Python tells us that it needs protobuf 24.4. Now let's say we bump up rules Java to 8.14. Well, rules Java needs a higher version of protobuf. And so that's the version we get. And then so on here, we get this, and then we end up with protobuf 32 at this point. And of course, we could always just depend on it directly. And if the version we depend on is higher than the versions our dependencies depend on, we get the latest version. So it's pretty well defined. It's nice. It's easy. Any questions about that so far? Yeah.
Shouldn't that be called maximal version selection?
Take it up with Jay.
There's a good reason for this.
Yeah.
So it goes across your graph and it picks the minimum version that satisfies all of the constraints. So each one of these edges in the graph is a minimal required version. And so it'll pick the lowest version that is possible, as opposed to looking out all the versions that are available and picking out whatever's latest. That would be maximal.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. It's actually maximum version, maximum of all the minimum versions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Max.
Yeah. Yeah, Scott.
If you were to try and do this explicit version because you were, trying to, your product doesn't depend on protobuf, but you're trying to upgrade to fix some issue
Mm-hmm.
On a transitive dependency, would this be best practice, or would you try to express that differently in the module file?
Well, I think if you know it works for you and you don't have time or access to the upstream to
Yeah.
update it, then go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the native Bazel version, you can set repo name equals null, so it prevents your root project from depending on it, but still bounds the version. And if this dependency appears no other place, this actually has no effect. It doesn't introduce anything.
All right. And so this demo, this is entirely self-contained on these slides. This is not part of the repo. This is literally you on your command line entering these commands and walking through this. So basically creating just a temporary module with rules Java and rules Python. And then there's the Bzlmod command, which has several subcommands that gives you a lot of interesting information. So for example, explain yourself, protobuf. What the hell? Protobuf's like, well, Java and Python invited me. I'm friends of a friend, So that's how I ended up at your house, total stranger. So there's a bit more output than this because, we only have so much space on the slide. And this is really the important stuff that I wanted you to see here. And the party keeps going. We have Bzlmod deps. And I'm still, in my head, not totally clear on the difference between mod deps and graph, other than graph has more information, but they're very similar. But this is, of course, super handy, and you can see where things are coming from. Oh, and I guess here, one thing to note, some of these things appear multiple times, Bazel features and so forth, and some of them have asterisks. It's not in the documentation, but what I figured out is that means that the version came from another module, right? Right?
No, it means it has been expanded somewhere else.
Well, yeah, that's
As in, this is a graph. It's a
Mhm.
it's a DAG. Yeah, it's a direct
acyclic.
acyclic graph, and we're showing it as a tree.
Mhm.
So some of
Right.
the nodes, for example, Bazel features with the star there, it's already on line 3 of the output.
Right.
We're just saying,
Well-
it's been in this tree before, so if it has any children, it's going to be up there. It's not going to be.
Oh, so that's not, this was selected from rules Java.
No.
Oh, okay, well-
The second occurrence is always going to have the star. The first occurrence is always not going to have the star.
See, okay, so,
Just made Bazel and query.
That was actually one of the original names, except that we don't accept query, expressions in this.
Oh, okay.
So we decided not to call it that.
That
All
was
right.
a joke, but.
well,
In the original, it was called a mod query.
Oh,
Okay, so what I wrote here is a total lie, but except this, but you lied too. You said it was a DAG. Look at that, there's a cycle right there.
It's not a fact. Oh, yeah, I lied.
So we're both liars. We're all liars. Don't believe anything any of us say. So yeah, so mod graph has more information. No need to belabor that. You can still jump under the hood here. Now, just something to know that I've put here is because I built with Bazel 7, the canonical repo names now have a tilde instead of a plus because of hilarious reasons that I think you fixed it, right, Zhilong?
I did.
Yeah.
Tilde caused a really bad performance regression on Windows.
Yeah.
Because of the, if you know Windows, the 8.3 like file length thing, and if you go over it, they will use the tilde. And somehow having a tilde in your file name anywhere causes it to do like tons of lookups or whatever.
I think it
Yeah.
has to resolve that, and then it has to scan your file system.
Yeah, you do
Yeah.
that for every single file system access. That ended up being prohibitive.
Yeah. Just things you don't really need to know, but that are good to know at this point, or don't need to know at this point, but are still good to know. There's also show repo, where you could just tell me, like, where did you get this rules Java? And it will tell you exactly where it got it. And then, you can modify module.bazel here. You can do whatever you want to it, add, subtract, change, whatever. And then when you're done, just clean it up. That's the whole demo. So there you go. All right. So I've mentioned the Bazel Central Registry a few times. I think folks might already be, is anybody not familiar with what we mean by the registry? Okay, so folks are familiar with the registry. I don't need to belabor that. So yes, we have non-registry overrides, single version override, Git archive override, that sort of thing. We've talked about Bazel.lock stores those integrity values for you, and you hopefully know that if you need to, if you're worried about the privacy implications of registry.bazel.build, knowing what you depend on, fortunately it's a well-defined format and you can create your own private registry and sever the ties with the central registry. All right. So why does Bzlmod make us happy? Again, it's a boot camp. Got drill. Come on. Yeah. Why do we like Bzlmod instead of Workspace? Yeah.
We don't have to resolve transitive dependencies ourselves.
Yep. Definitely the dependency resolution is well defined. Yeah.
Order is not significant when declaring new dependencies.
Order is insignificant except for toolchains, but yeah. Because toolchain registration is order dependent. It's just now you have a well-defined order that doesn't depend on you invoking the macros in the right order.
I need to go download a whole external repository just to read a little tiny piece of text.
Yeah, I guess that is true. I mean, at least for, module resolution for sure, yeah. Yeah.
Lock files.
You hear that, Jay? He likes lock files now. Yeah.
I have an abusive relationship with lock files.
Yeah. So, oh, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I can throw a bunch of third-party build file code out the window because someone else is maintaining it.
Third-party build code.
Like random C++ libraries.
You mean in the PCR?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like the community only have to solve this migrate a C++ library to Bazel module once, and you can share the results and avoid conflict of build files.
I am not familiar with that particular problem, but I will take your word for it. I'm familiar with a lot of problems, as you can see, but that's one that has escaped me so far. Even though C++ was my first language, but I haven't used it in years. But yeah, we've got a lot of self-initialization going on. The modules can do a lot of their own setup, version resolution. I like the fact that all of your direct dependencies have to be in the module.bazel file. So it tells you this is everything that we're using. Now that could be kind of a pain, especially if your tool chains aren't encapsulated and you have to include everything the tool chains need, but that's why we talk about the hub pattern later. Take a breath. Okay. And then, yeah, we're about to dive in deeply into module extensions in a minute. But the repo name usage constraints, they're a pain when you first hit those canonical path repo name issues. But once you clean them up, life is beautiful because everything just works and you don't depend on these implementation details anymore. And yeah, just overall, you have more clarity around what your build actually needs and what it's doing. Things are better encapsulated. I hear there's a performance benefit. I have to admit, I haven't personally really noticed the performance benefit. But just from the point of view of understanding what's going on in the build, it's just for that alone, it's amazing.
I've heard that the requirement that everything is in the module.bazel file apparently makes performance better. I don't know how true it is.
Well, there's several ways that can happen. One is, like you said there, in Workspace, because you execute the file from top to bottom, you kind of have to fetch all the things. Anything you load from is going to have to be fetched. Whereas in the module.bazel world, you only fetch the things that you need. I guess, yeah, so similarly to module
basically in
extensions.
Workspace, to know what you have defined, you have to build those macros. And that macros has been defined in other repos, so you have to fetch that repo to have those definition. Even though later you may not depending on the repository that those macros define. But in Bzlmod, at least without module extension, then, oh no, even with module extension, then if you actually, depending on this repo, it will trigger the resolution, the fetch of this module extension and Bazel data.
Yeah, we had kind of an extreme case, but we used to fetch, when you cold started any Bazel build, we used to fetch around 800 megabytes of stuff. And it took, 20 seconds or something to get to do anything. And now we fetch like 30 megabytes.
Yeah.
And it's much faster. So.
And then it took 30 to 45 to recompile protobuf. All right. So I think we've touched on some of this, but for those of you who maybe have already started a Bzlmod build or migration, what are some of the challenges? Yes. Or no, I'm sorry. I was looking at David first. You're right in the line of sight, sorry.
Okay, so like one of the real significant challenges that I ran into in my migration was the fact that the repo that I started with had it was depending on many rule sets that were quite old. Okay, and so it was a major discovery problem to discover which rules I could update and in which order and at which stepped revisions, because like I could not, like go straight to the head of the line of rule CC, because then that would not work with protobuf or what have you, right? There were all of these intermingled
Cyclic dependencies, yeah.
right? So I had to like update protobuf 3 different times in order to get to progressively newer versions that would then allow me to update other things.
Yeah, which is reflected in some of these changes. You'll see
Yes.
some of that here.
Yes, and so simply discovering the sequence of updates that I needed to do was not always easy, and the version dependencies expressed in the workspace part of the build, some of these repos, was not consistent with the dependencies expressed in the BCR.
Yeah.
Right? So I would look to the BCR for some guidance as to what needed what, and then I would look at the workspace implementation, which I had to maintain compatibility with, and then I got different answers. So I had to figure things out
Yeah.
by trial and error.
Yeah, there's a reason why the only external dependencies I have in this project are like rules CC, rules Java, rules Python, and protobuf.
And gRPC.
Oh, I didn't do gRPC. No.
It was real fun.
Yeah. Right. Anyone else? War stories? Yeah.
Or all our users are like, using run files libraries is too much work. I'm just going to hard code the path.
Yes. Paths that depend on the repo name. That's number one thing, that canonical repo names break like that. Anyone else? Yeah.
There is this main renaming of the repo that has to happen, similar to the canonical path names. If you had a custom
that gets to an aspect of repo names I'm going to talk about a little bit, which is in your own repo, you shouldn't need to refer to your own repo name.
We discovered that.
Yeah.
But we have to clean it up.
Yeah, there's a lot of it from the past, yeah.
I don't know if you guys run into this issue where if you have multiple releases and you have some stuff that is relying on the Bzlmod and some doesn't, you have an issue with the remote execution and remote caching as well, where in CI you almost have to divide if this will work with the latest greatest, this one is a legacy
Yeah.
infrastructure, and I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys seen it.
Well, the methodology that I'm actually going to explicitly put on a slide later is I don't mix them. I keep Bzlmod and Workspace separate.
Hard with the long support branches, right? Like you have to split up your infrastructure in order to accommodate it.
No, because what we'll see here is all the way up until right here, the end of this branch, all Workspace. And then I start sticking Bzlmod on top. And so basically from here to here, all it is a thin Bzlmod layer on top of whatever was there before. So I literally just keep building between Workspace and Bzlmod, making sure that they have parity without trying to do a gradual thing. I mean, I guess some folks do it that way and it works for them fine, but in my methodology, I just had an easier time of making sure that I would basically have a separate branch with the Bzlmod work where I'd sort of run ahead and get that all working as best I could, and then keep the Workspace side working, start cherry picking or taking pieces, making new branches out of it, until I eventually got to the point where Bzlmod was at parity with. So basically, I just still treated Workspace like the main thing until Bzlmod was totally ready. Yeah.
We did have some similar issues with like Bzlmod and Workspace builds coexisting in an output base, and we wrote a dirty little wrapper script that will just clear your entire cache if it does access switch.
Yeah, this is what we have to do, but there is a cost to it.
All right, so let's move on a little bit. So why are they challenging? Repo names, repo names, repo names, repo names. Does that remind you of anybody? Old Microsoft CEO? Anyways, repo names, repo names, repo names, woo! All right. Somebody keep me away from the coffee. Yes, we talked about run file libraries, dependencies that aren't Bzlmod ready, obviously. But that is not nearly as big a problem as it used to be. A lot of things, thankfully, have started migrating towards Bzlmod. I had a whole blog post on package tar, because if you hold it right, it works great. But if you hold it the old way, it's completely broken. There's the whole process we mentioned a little bit earlier, where if you've got your own setup macros and those need to become extensions, you need to know what's going on there. And then module.bazel. But of course, the biggest thing is if you don't have any tests. Like, you can't do this without tests. Like, I couldn't have done the rule Scala migration if they didn't have great tests already. And yes, I did have to add some and fix a couple, but it's just, there's no way I could have done that work without it. And there's no way I could have developed this example without it. I mean, I caught so many embarrassing, stupid mistakes while I was developing the example because I had my own tests there. So don't even try.
Unit tests of your code or tests of your Bazel setup?
A little of both. So I have a whole section on testing that I don't think we'll have time to get into in depth. But of course, you can say, OK, I have my regular Bazel test targets and build files and run those and make sure they work. But then there's testing that Bazel, the whole Bazel execution does what you want it to do, and that it also fails in the way that it should fail when something's wrong. And for that, I'm actually using shell scripts. There are other, I've got a slide that says, there are a couple of different options, but when it comes to like most of the kind of testing we're talking about with compatibility with Bzlmod and everything, it's essentially shell scripts. Any other questions or comments? All right. I can tell blood sugar's running a little low. We'll maybe take just a quick break here in a minute because we don't have a lot of time left, but let's see, what slide am I on? I can't see. I am on 56 out of... Yeah. So this is why it's open source, because I want to make the time useful, in the moment and sort of get everybody, up to speed. But a lot of the details, a lot of the information that will be useful to you as you go back and try to do this or continue what you're doing, it's in here. You'll have access to it. But yeah, just to quickly, oh, not that. Yeah. So, and what I found, like I said, when I started Rule Scala, it wasn't even compatible with Bazel 7. So there was just a whole lot of work that had nothing really to do with Bzlmod. It was just, we needed to upgrade to newer Bazel. And, eventually once you get there, then, there's the Bzlmod stuff. So that's what this example repo shows. You don't have to, you can actually switch to Bzlmod while still on Bazel 7, obviously. So you don't have to go to Bazel 8 before you can do Bzlmod, but it's up to you. The order isn't really important, but it's just good to know that when you do upgrade, there are other problems that you may hit that are not Bzlmod related. And again, don't panic. Lots of little pieces you'll see in there, but they're solvable one at a time. Everything will still work, and we have the tests to prove it. Now, I was going to break after this section, but I think folks want maybe a quick, well, does anybody need a quick break, or do you want me to just keep going and get it over with? Keep going. Wow, we got some troopers here. All right. Bootcamp is doing its job. It's making you tough. All right. So it is literally the definition of touchy. You touch it and it freaks out. So it's non-reproducible. Actually, reproducible failure. All right. So, so basically, we needed that, yeah. Yeah, module extensions create repos, just like your workspace setup macros. Now, something that wasn't clear in an earlier version, and Jay helped me clarify this, if your repo that you're instantiating is a Bazel module, use Bazel dep. Or if it doesn't need any sort of configuration, there's a utility called use repo rule. It literally wraps an existing repo rule so that you don't have to write your own extension for it. You could just use it. And the way that you configure these things is by instantiating tag classes. Is anybody here unfamiliar with what a tag class is?
I have a question about it.
Sure.
Why is it called a tag class?
Yeah.
Worst naming choice.
Oh, no, okay.
Absolutely the worst naming choice, because Bazel already has things that are called tags that have nothing whatsoever to do with tag classes.
Yeah.
Let's go through the commit history and see who wrote that.
We decided to call those tags for whatever reason. I don't know, there's multiple things you can attach to an extension. For some reason, they ended up being tags. And, lots of reviewers on that doc, nobody said anything to me.
It's all your fault, all of you.
And then, the class of tags, we decided not to call it tag type or something, because that sounds even worse.
Or tag struct.
Sorry?
Tag struct.
Tag struct.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. So tags are kind of a struct, right?
Yeah.
With an instance of a struct.
Mm-hmm.
So the tag class is essentially a struct.
What about extension attribute?
But that is longer. At least tag class has brevity going for it.
It's, let's say,
Or extend.
you provide multiple tags to an extension.
Yeah.
It's not like rules where you just instantiate a rule and give it a bunch of attributes. It's like multiple bags of that.
Each tag have multiple attributes.
All right, and so the bike shed is over here. Yeah. It's like, oh, it's a tag class, or extension attribute if you're not into the whole brevity thing. Okay, so nobody's getting my Lebowski references. Jeez. All right. We're going to have a showing of Lebowski later. Okay. So yeah. And now modules, if they want to use a repo created by an extension, they need to call use repo. And we'll see what that looks like right here. So this is the Bootcamp module. Oh, and that's the, oh no, I did undo it. Okay, so, this is what's happening. Extensions live in files, just like workspace macros. And we get this object through use extension. And this particular extension creates a repo full of toolchains. And so we want to use that. Well, again, I wouldn't have to include this line if I didn't have a test that used this extra toolchains flag. Literally, there's no dependency in the code itself on that repo name, but I have a test that depends on it, and that's why we have to use it here. But then we have the tag class, and you can have multiple tag classes for a single extension. The idea is you could sort of think of it like in a typical macro if you've got a parameter that's a dict, and it has various fields. Well, that's a way to think about what the tag class is doing here. And it's not a function call. It looks like a function call. It's just a way of declaring static metadata to configure a particular extension. Any questions about that so far? Alrighty. Now, I feel like I have to talk over whoever's talking in the other room. Oh, was that my next slide? Did I actually just auto-advance? I did. So in the interest of time, I won't pop these open, but you could sort of hopefully understand the structure of what's in that repository now. You can look at the module files. The extensions all come from rules magic under magic extensions. We do have this one, actually, let me show you the leaflet repo, because it's the most basic. Leaflet repo, the extension. In this case, we are literally just invoking the existing setup macro without any parameters. But we are returning this extension meta. So this is another lock file related thing. So please correct me if I get this concept wrong. But the idea of this reproducible equals true metadata is you're basically telling Bazel that if you configure this with the same inputs, I will provide the same repos as a result, which is normally what you would want to do. But there are cases, I guess, where extensions don't do that, particularly if they maybe download like an HTTP archive, but they don't use an integrity value or a Git archive or something. Like any repo rule that downloads something, but you don't have the integrity value, then reproducible is not what you want here. But most of the times, that's what you want. And the benefit of this is it doesn't show up in the lock file. So that's one of the things that makes it a bit more manageable to have the lock file checked in now. Yeah.
All my rule set maintainers I know to start using reproducible equals true.
Well, when it applies, hopefully, because to the best of my knowledge, this is not enforced by Bazel itself. It's sort of like a pinky swear from the maintainer that.
Yeah. How can we
yeah.
check whether something is reproducible?
Oh, come on, you're Google. You haven't solved the halting problem yet?
Download it like 100 times.
Yes, heuristics. Woo. Anyway, so this is like a bare bones module extension, and as a matter of fact, there's a. I think I have the link here. Oh, I don't have it here. Well, it's somewhere in here. There's a Bazel Skylib utility called module.asExtension. So if it really is just a basic thing, you just wrap it in that, and you don't even have to write your own. But these other two extensions, these are a bit more substantial in the code base. And I like writing helpers for things. So I have one little helper. Why don't we just actually look at this guy right now? So if we look at the config extension, I've got this thing, root module settings, which is not a built-in. It is a helper that I created in private.bzlmod. And it's a very basic helper. That takes, this is the module context object. I've abbreviated it here, MCTX, but module_CTX is the full name. And what I've done is I pass in the module context from which is what the extension implementation function receives, which maybe it would help if I showed you that. Here, so this is my implementation function. Like a rule, like a repo rule, it gets a kind of context object. And so I've got this defaults. This is basically a dict key value pairs of defaults for this particular configuration. And so what this helper is doing is it has access to the list of modules that use this extension. So you could have tons of modules, many of which don't care about the extension or that use this module but don't use this extension, won't show up in this list. But if a module used the extension and, well, if it used the extension, it's going to show up in this list. And in this case, there's an API. Once you have the module object, you could say, hey, are you root? Then you can be special. And for this, and I just made this choice for this particular implementation. You do not have to make this choice. But I'm only paying attention to settings from the root module. So if the root module uses this extension, I'm going to get whatever values that it specifies. And yeah, I've got a little, little expression here. We don't need to break it down, but it's essentially going to use whatever the root uses, or it's going to get the default value. And if the root module doesn't use this extension, I'm still going to use some default values. So this is all just one particular helper out of the universe of possible helpers so that I don't have to write that damn loop everywhere. So if you look in rules Scala, there's a Bzlmod helper file that is a bit more substantial that I use in several of the extensions. But the basic pattern here, because I hate writing nested loops, even if, I like reusing things when possible. But conceptually, this is the basic pattern. You get the context, you iterate over the modules that use the extension, and then you can go, so for each tag that it uses, and it can use a tag more than once, you can iterate over all that information. And it's totally up to you what to do with it. Again, for example, if you only care about the root module, you only look at the root module. That is your choice. Or if you want to do something different between dev and again, only the root module will have the dev dependencies because they're ignored whenever a module is not root. But you could decide to do that. So these are just, some basic patterns of what you can do to implement your module extension. And a lot of it really is just collecting metadata. And then when you have that, you do something with it, which can be pass it to the existing workspace macro or setup macro, if you want to get away from that. Questions? Does this make sense? Yes, Scott?
So you're saying you could have called dot settings a bunch of times?
Yes.
Passing different values? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely could. And you can call it once as a non-dep dependency and once as a dep dependency. In fact, there's an example of that in the, well, there's examples of it in Rule Scala, but there's also here where for the tool chains, I am always, Rules Magic is always going to use that extension, get the repo that it creates, and register the tool chains in it. But it's only going to instantiate the tool chains it needs when I use it as a dev dependency. So the module extension could determine this instance of the tag was non-dep dependency, this was a dep dependency, and it could be, you can have repeated tags as well, like if it's valid for your extension. The point is, this is just sort of the basic mechanics of what an extension does. It's totally up to you to define the semantics. Okay, questions, comments? All right, lots of, okay, we're going to sleep again, keep it moving. Okay, keep her moving. So these are the actual API. I'm not going to read all this, obviously. This is here for reference. But these, all these links are to the documentation of the actual object types that you've just seen at play in the walkthrough here, just for later reference. Helpers help. I encourage you not to write 4 nested loops everywhere. If you see patterns, extract those patterns into helpers. You will help yourself and everybody else who has to make sense of it later. And back to the, we already hit this a little bit. when do you use well, let me take a step back. This isn't when do you use. This is, here's, again, a recap of the basic APIs for extensions. Bzlmod brings the module into scope. Use extension brings an extension from a module into scope. And then use repo brings a repository from the extension into scope. Does that make perfect sense, or is it clear as mud? I can't tell. Like, sounds like Bueller? Okay. One person got that reference. Okay. So, so why would you want to use repo rule? Again, if you just want to pull in an HTTP archive and you don't want to write an extension, you can use repo rule. It's there if you need it. So when do you use what? Bzlmod, if that's all you need. Use repo rule if that's all you need. Use extension if you have to configure something. Questions? All right. So I've got a table here. I'm going to flash this up and one more table. Just take a second to read it and shout out if you have any questions or comments, because this is just side-by-side detail, a lot of recap. Yeah.
Sorry, just a question regarding workspace. We have this, for example, register toolchains that you're just showing, right? The rule itself in its module Bazel, it has register toolchains clause. And I'm wondering if in my module, I import your rules magic, right? Does it matter? Like, because I think in Bazel, at least workspace, the first register toolchains wins.
Yes.
Bzlmod is the same thing?
It's the same, but it's defined by the graph traversal. So if the root module calls register toolchains, those toolchains win. If you've got other child modules and those try to register different toolchains of the same type, then depending on how deep they are in the traversal order, then those toolchains. Huh? Breadth first search? Yeah. And then if you have a problem, if you're the root module, you just register the ones you want first. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any surprising or confusing information here side by side? All right, one more. Specifically, and of course this first row is they do similar things. The workspace macros and the extensions, they create repos. But the other stuff, all right, I'm not seeing confusion, I'm not hearing confusion. Wait, I just saw confusion. What was that?
I was confused about how you would make the sound.
Oh. Maybe like, huh? By the way, you don't have to take a picture. I've got the slides online so you can grab them later. I mean, you're not prohibited. I just don't want you to feel like it's required.
That makes my life easier.
Ah, sure. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Can I stop a non-root module from registering toolchains?
A non-root? Oh, yeah, this has come up.
So I think the only case in Bzlmod that will force it to download repository we don't need is because of tuition resolution. And currently we don't have a good way to let the root module configure. I don't want this tuition register in this dependency, and that has been a problem. But we haven't come up a good API to describe that. One reason is that this register tuition API, it doesn't tell you what type of tuition it is, right? So you have to fetch that target to know what type it is. So that's a problem.
And there is like an issue or a discussion thread on it.
There's an issue.
So I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe you could connect later and find it.
We need to improve that.
Jay?
But you have that pattern to kind of work around that issue, right? Toolchainization.
Well, as implementer of a tool chain, a hub repo for tool chains, yes. But, I guess if it depends on the implementer being able to give you, at this point, it depends on the implementer providing that ability, not on Bazel providing it.
So tell the implementer to attend this workshop.
Yeah. or download the slides or something. All right, any other questions or comments about what's up here now? So hopefully most of this is already familiar based on what we've already talked about. There is the whole thing about bind isn't allowed. Maybe folks already knew that, but yeah. Capabilities constraints. We've talked, oh, there's the modules as extension. I knew it was in here somewhere. We talked about tag classes. We talked about module CTX. One thing you can't do is you can't compose extensions. I remember Simon Stewart wanted to create Basel Federation for Bzlmod, and he couldn't because the extension path is the extension ID, and those are unique. I think you were telling him that, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So no composition really, but if you write helper functions, you can achieve composition that way. And we talked about why we would want to return extension metadata reproducible true. And I like to think of module extensions as being wafer-thin macro wrappers. Come on, Python fans, Monty Python. It's not just a programming language. In fact, the Monty Python came first. Anyways, so, you know, I've done this in this example. I did this as part of Rule Scala. I deliberately made the workspace macro as close to the Bzlmod API as I could. And the idea is you're maintaining workspace compatibility, but you may break users that depend on the old API, but you basically say, hey, sorry, but it still works with workspace. So if you want to stay at the party, you know, this is what you got to do. And the thing is once they've made that adaptation, because the API is so similar, they're actually that much closer to being Bzlmod ready. So that's the whole idea. You're reusing the implementation, you're maintaining a very similar interface so that you're reducing that distance from having your users or whoever you're working with being able to switch over to Bzlmod. Does that make sense? Comments, questions? Huh?
It's a really clever way of getting people to upgrade to Bzlmod.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I was doing the Rule Scala thing, I don't want to re-implement all this. Oh, I know. So, yeah. All right. Hmm? Well, in the example itself, I think, I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but you could pull open, is this it? Yeah. So for example, just here with registering the toolchain, so on the left, in the Bootcamp module in the example repo, we have how we load the magic toolchains macro and do all that stuff. And then you can see it's essentially the same interface in Bzlmod, except it's using the module extension syntax. Same parameters, same semantics, just a little bit different syntax is the idea. If you go look at Rule Scala, and I should probably partition that README into a whole encyclopedia of documents. I just sort of documented as fast as I could in the one file. But in Rule Scala, you could also see between the workspace and Bzlmod how similar the APIs are. Hmm? Yeah.
So like, as a maintainer of like some rule sets, I feel like sometimes, it's less of a problem with module.basel, but sometimes my module.basel files get kind of gnarly.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's include, but that's only allowed if you're the root repo.
Yep.
Are there any other strategies to like make my module.basel files
Well,
smaller?
for me, the big one was toolchain, what I call toolchainization. I thought it was already a name, but apparently maybe I invented it. I don't know. But the hub repo is, because what I found when I was doing, in fact, why don't we go to the actual blog post? So I go through a couple iterations where I wrote a module extension in the EngFlow example repo because Rule Scala was not Bzlmod compatible. And I kind of go through a couple iterations of that. And one of the biggest things was I had to use repo and a bunch of crap. And it turned out it's because these were Scala toolchain dependencies. And because it wasn't Bzlmod ready and it didn't have the hub repo pattern, I had to instantiate them on behalf of Rule Scala. So part of the work, and there's a whole section at the end here. I doubt we have time for it, but I can still get maybe a quick preview in. But by designing the way Scala instantiated its toolchains to use basically this one repo, the Rules Scala toolchains repo, and I've got Rules Magic toolchains here, which is a scaled down version. You basically have your module extension, through collecting the tag class metadata, decide what it's going to instantiate or not, throw it all in one repo, And then as it's decided, you know what, let me just show you the scaled down version. It's time for tool chains. That's what the people want. Tool chains. So this is just tag class. This is the same pattern. I've got tag classes. I get my root module settings, and I pass it to the magic tool chains macro. And that macro, hold on, I can't type in tool chains. I want the other tool chains. Oh, wait. Yeah. Hold on. I can't think with one hand. I have to use both my hands on the keyboard. That one. So the parameters here, I have different tool chains for these different games. And this is meant to be a very scaled down, dumb example, but it has the same basic pattern. If you go look and I've got links to the Rule Scala examples. If you go look, after seeing this, you should see the same pattern there. But the idea is I'm collecting this parameter information and deciding, oh, I need this game, I need that game. And for whatever games I've configured, then I instantiate those repositories that the tool chains for that game needs. And then this Magic Toolchains repository is a repo rule that does the actual generation of the toolchains repo. The magic of module extensions and the scoping mechanism there is if your module, if your main, everything else, if it needs a repo from an extension, you have to call use repo. If the repo is only needed by something within the extension that it instantiates, you don't have to do that. All the repos instantiated within a module extension are visible to all other repos in that module extension. It's sort of like the workspace global namespace, but only for a particular module extension. Ish. I might be hand waving. Oh, thank God. I got Yunping's nod. I was like, okay, good. So yeah, so that's basically it. So that's why the hub pattern works, is you can instantiate all these repos as part of your tool chain, and nothing else has to know, and you don't have to invoke use repo. Your users don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, I think at the end of the blog post, well, here, at the time I wrote it, I haven't updated it, I say a glimpse of the future. But yeah, that's what it looks like now. So it doesn't even invoke the tool. This doesn't even use the toolchains repo explicitly. This is the EngFlow example module that consumes it. It doesn't even have a toolchains call. It just uses the default. You know, maybe I should make sure we jump to toolchains. I think we're almost done with this section. Oh, canonical repo names. We've seen this a little bit. We've talked about it. I think we know it's very, very bad to depend on them. And we'll go over, I'll lecture you about that a little bit more in a minute. But this is basically the format, even though it's an implementation detail and you should forget you ever heard it or saw it. It doesn't exist in your world. But this is sort of the format here, where it will tell you what module instantiated a repo. If there's multiple versions, that's encoded in there. It's usually not there because you're not using multiple version override. It will tell you what module extension created it and then what the actual repo name is. Forget this. You are never to look at this and depend on it, but that's what it is. But don't look. Don't even look at it. All right. The heralded rule Scala examples, easy to find, more references. Questions, concerns, and problems so far? All right, so I've got 13 minutes to go through the last 60 slides or something. So just skimming through at a high level here, I've already hinted at this a little bit. What is the plan? First, it's nice to have some principles in mind before you set out, and I'll talk about a few that I had in mind. Migrate to 7 first. It's not worth supporting Bzlmod on Basel 6 because it's missing features. But after 7, it's actually very well supported. I mentioned at some point that with the Rule Scala thing in particular, I had a whole separate branch that I maintained. I rebased as things landed, but that's where I did a lot of the work, and then I would pick off commits and things like that to send separate pull requests over time. That way I wasn't breaking everything all at once or sending huge pull requests. Or even if they were large, at least they were focused on a specific mechanism. So that is an option. You can also consider just going to 8, like, forget about Bzlmod, just go straight to 8 first. You can do that. That's what this example repo does. And I already mentioned how I didn't do the split mode. I just said, let's keep workspace doing the whole thing. Let's keep, and then when Bzlmod's ready, we'll add it. And Rule Scholar to this day still supports both. So, all right, again, yeah?
I'll add a little bit, just a note, that I did go to Bazel 8 before going to Bzlmod.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I discovered empirically is that in Bazel 8, some workspace support has been removed already, which leads to less intelligible diagnostics than if you're on Bazel 7. So that was, I learned that.
Look, the whole room turns.
Yeah.
I don't remember what we removed in 8, but
In any case, I believe you might get better diagnostics out of Bazel in 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also recommend if you migrate to Bzlmod, definitely start with Bazel 7.
Really? Not 8?
It has good support for both Bzlmod and Workspace. I think
But-
Bazel 8, because of some standardization work, we have to inject some repos in Workspace prefix, suffix in some weird way.
Wait, I thought 7 does that and 8 doesn't.
That might be.
Yeah.
That might
I could go into the notes.
Yeah. So Workspace support has some degradation in Bazel 8. That's true.
Oh, all right. Well, there you go. Yes.
How many people have heard about migration script that we published? Like, while you're
Yeah.
in Bazel 7, you can actually use a migration script, and please try it out. I actually tried it earlier with your repo, and it works. You just need to add in your own toolchain registration. And there was one error, but it was very easy to fix, and then it's working.
Well, that's
Is it the Python script in VCR? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And there is official documentation there, exactly.
yeah. And that script came out after I did all this. I wonder how it came to be.
help much for rule sets.
Hmm.
Different beast. For
Yeah.
active projects using other things,
For end projects, it's not.
for rule sets it's a different issue. You have to do what you did. So
Okay, good. Thank you. I don't feel like I wasted as much as my life.
Did you hear about the new rule set migration script?
All right. Oh, God. No, talk about trauma. But anyway, so my point, I was supposed to reassure you that this, don't panic, but I think you get the point. I've been saying this over and over again. I like to say that change is the result of repeating yourself, being redundant, and saying the same thing over and over again. So there you go. Review essential information. Couldn't have done this without the Bazel docs. That's what most of these links are, except for the blog posts I wrote. I already mentioned I didn't mix Bzlmod and Workspace. I make sure Workspace keeps building so that there's no disruption. Yeah, I've already said a lot of this. I don't need to go into as much detail. Module Bazel lock. We've talked a little bit about what it is and why we need. Yes?
Sure, just a question. How useful you think it is, in your opinion, to have the workspace of Bzlmod as during the migration, or maybe not the whole way?
I just didn't. I didn't really use it. Yeah. I'm not saying it couldn't be useful. I just didn't end up using it. So, yeah. So yes, we've already talked a little bit about what module Bazel lock is, why people have traditionally ignored it. But you shouldn't ignore it anymore, and you should actually update it using this refresh command, and maybe protect it with an error in your Bazel large state. Now in CI, you don't want to have lock file mode error. You want to override that with update. Otherwise, you could break CI for unrelated reasons. But at least when you're developing, you'll get a notification if anything that you do updates the lock file, and then that can go through CI. Yeah?
Can we just have like a Bazel lock command that updates my lock file?
Wow, I didn't know this was going to be like an AMA for the Bazel maintainers, but
Any Bazel build command will update your log file. Should be. But there's
That's what I thought, but empirically,
well, it's not there's one specific command that only updates it when you run that command. It will update with every command that could potentially change it.
So the dependencies in the log file gets updated when those dependencies gets evaluated. So running Bzlmod deps evaluates everything, right? But if you just build a target, it only evaluates the dependencies that's required by the target. That's why sometimes it updates partially in the log file.
Oh, and that does remind me in terms of like.
There's also a Bzlmod refresh command now, I think.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, it's right there. Haha.
I
And I did these two commits back to back. Like I deliberately did this so you could see how this ends up being quite a large lock file. And then in the next commit with Bazel 9, it actually got rid of a lot of that. So yeah, it's a lot better in 9. And some of that might be, I'm not sure how much of that the function is Bazel and how much is the rule set itself.
Yeah.
But
In Bazel 9, you upgrade all those rule sets. Those rule sets has been using this reproducible equals true, and then those module extension are all gone.
yeah, virtuous cycle. Is there another question? No. Okay. Let me, because we're down to like 6 minutes. Oh boy, that's a lot of slides. Well, apparently this is bullshit. Like you should actually stay on 7 until you migrate. So here, I'll just very quickly skip through these. A lot of this, I've put a lot of redundancy in here. So as I skim through, you'll be like, oh yeah, I heard you talk about that. I'll look it up later. Repository name handling, don't you do it. So no, don't depend, whoop, didn't mean to do that. Don't do it. Instead of hard coding a name, get it from Bazel, only refer to by its parent name. Oh, and this was from a blog post I wrote. And then the other one is don't include your own project's name in there. I won't, this slide is just a reference to branches and commits on that branch. You can look up where I specifically deal with this. I won't go through any of it right now. One of the big things, though, is if you do need to refer to an internal target in a macro, something that will get invoked from another repo, wrap it in label. And I actually found out when I was adding the Windows support the other day, if you use a repo, like if you use platforms to determine if something is Windows, you should wrap that reference in a label so that your clients don't necessarily have to depend on platforms explicitly. Anyways, that's a sidetrack. We can get into that later. Bazel team is willing to change Bazel rather than have you depend on canonical repo names. Thank you, Zhenong, for this. This is where the one case that we couldn't get around having to parse the canonical repo name was when you generate a repository and want the default target to be the same repo name. And now we have the repository context.original name to do that for us now. So it's because repository context.name in Bzlmod is the canonical name, but original name will give you the name with which it was originally instantiated. And there's examples in there. Leave things out, yeah, guidance examples. See, I wrote this knowing how much information there was and that I would just have to get you guys a little familiar with it, and then you could look it up later when you need it. Same thing with patching. There's a branch here, the Bzlmod client patches, which does the same thing as the Bzlmod branch, but it's the Bootcamp module adding patches for rules magic instead of fixing rules magic. Now, of course, the upshot is I created those patches by doing git show-p on the Bzlmod commits. So there's sort of this related process here where if you do need to generate a patch, clone the original repo of the dependency, or if you just have a tarball, make a git repo out of it, make your changes, use the git commits as your patch mechanism, or to generate patches to add to your thing. Okay, patching, tool chains, we've talked about this. So I won't walk through all the code right now because we have 2 minutes, but this series of links effectively walks through the actual toolchain instantiation and registration mechanism here. We've got the magic toolchains macro, that's what Workspace calls. the Magic Toolchains module extension wraps it and invokes the same thing. We create this hub repo called Magic Toolchains Repository. The clients here can use the tag classes to configure whatever toolchains it needs. And then rules magic invokes registered toolchains. This hopefully is all sounding familiar because we looked at it a little bit. And I also even touched on the fact that rules magic can do its own dev dependency toolchain, so it's not imposing its own requirements on clients. This is the toolchainization pattern, hub repo pattern. So what sort of unlocked toolchains for me was realizing, oh, it's dependency injection. You have a toolchain type, and you're telling your build system, I need a toolchain of this type. I don't care what the details are. I just need providers from a toolchain matching this type. And what that means is it's like a whole other dependency graph just for your toolchains that have nothing to do with your actual project and its dependencies, if that makes sense. And so that's why you can get away with, in a module extension, you generate the toolchain repo, you create all the repositories it needs over here in this other space, and then actually this little hub / all, that's the magic of the register toolchains call, is it doesn't care what's there. It could be empty build files, this will work. It can have all sorts of other targets in it. That pattern will work. It will only find and register the toolchains matching that pattern, even if it's empty. And yeah, so that's how you can get away with generating a repo with all the dependencies in a module extension, and you don't have to import anything as a user to get it to work or use repo on it. Make sense-ish? Yay. Okay. And ordering, we've talked about this, defined by the module graph. It's still an ordering dependency, but not much. A little bit of before and after. Oh, we're at time. Okay, let me see. Testing. Do testing. You can't do it without testing. Testing is usually the thing I talk about, but today, I mean, you've seen examples of it as we go along. It would have just been impossible without it. And links to the infrastructure, approaches, rule Scala. Oh, and then there's some CI stuff, dependency compatibility. The one thing I will say really quickly about compatibility is I took it to heart at one point after Simon Stewart said something in the Bazel Slack about, yeah, if people upgrade our modules that we provide, we shouldn't force them to upgrade everything else, should we? It's like, oh. So there's a pattern in here of, if I could just show very briefly, from the, not the Bootcamp module, the rules magic. So you'll see these patterns of where I Bazel dep an old version, but then I single version override the latest version. And what that does is when I'm building this rule set and testing it as the root module, I get the latest versions. But when someone else consumes it, they only need the lowest versions specified in the Bazel dep. And then, yes?
So how do you test?
Yes. Glad you asked. So I do have a blog post about that. But the upshot, that is where the latest version module comes in. And there's a reason for, where is, let me close everything. Latest dependencies. So I have a module that basically imports, it's the same that was in the single version override. But the reason in the main module.bazel I still have the single version override is because if I just depended on this module from the main module, I get all these warnings about how there's newer versions available and the root module depends on an old version. And so I have the single version override for the module.bazel, but my tests, all the example repos that I have for the tests, including the Bootcamp repo, uses this module. All you have to do is your tests can depend on this, and then it gets the latest versions pretty easily. So it is a little bit of a duplication of information, but it works out. And then there is a Bootcamp test minimum dependency versions, and I will just leave you with this because this is the end here. Let me just close a lot of these. Don't save. Oh, God, so many tabs. So again, this is a little shell script. where I have this one function, this driver function, do build and test. It takes arguments for the different versions of things, and these are all the default lowest versions that we support. You can read through this, you can parse it later, but then here are my actual test cases. So by default, I'm using the minimum version of everything, make sure that still works. Here, I've got a different combination where I want to keep Bazel 7, but upgrade rules Java to the lowest version, etc. So you can have all kind of fun with this. And this does correspond to a rules Java example or rules Scala example that I won't get into. There's blog posts, there's links, everything is in the slides, and I've already taken up too much of your time. You can see all the other, oh yeah, and I repeated myself because it's all about being redundant and saying the same thing over and over again. Links, examples, guidance, testing. Testing. Anyways, oh my God. Oh, I'm going up, that's why, I'm so confused. Here we go. Takeaways. Explicit. Declarations. Eliminate ordering. No more collisions. Enable self-configuration. And all of this is much easier with a good test suite. So with that, praise Kier. Thank Kier for the macro data uprising. Okay, come to game night if you haven't already. We have a little registration link there. It goes to, was it meetup.build or whatever is the actual thing. Not tonight, sorry, tomorrow night. Yeah, we're gonna have a fun and games, Bazel related. We actually have a Bazel game that is kind of neat, that like a board game, a Bazel board game that is actually kind of neat. EngFlow is also doing this world tour thing. You can sign up at meetup.build. You can learn more about it there. And that's it. All right.